ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ?
Yes, sir. Good morning.
ಆಕಾಶವಾಣಿ ಕೇಳಿಸಿದ್ದು ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣಂದು, ಪ್ರತ್ಯಕ್ಷ ಆಗಿದ್ದು ನೀನು. ಸರಿ ಸರಿ, ಆಯ್ತಾ? ಪಾಪ ಕಾರ್ಯಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಮುಗಿತಾ ತಾತಂದು?
ಹಾ ಸರ್, ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಸಂಡೇ ಒಂದು ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಆಯ್ತು.
ಸರಿ ನೋಡಿ, ಈ ರೀತಿಯಾದಂಥ ಸನ್ನಿವೇಶ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ದೀಸ್ ಕೈಂಡ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಅಕೇಶನ್ಸ್
ಹ್ಮ್
ಮೇಕ್ ಯು ಲುಕ್ ಅಟ್ ಲೈಫ್ with a question. So people who are just around us all the time, suddenly they disappear. Then everyone is left with the question, where do they disappear? Where do they go? What happens to them? That's a very natural question that anyone will have, especially when we lose our close ones. And that is where spirituality comes into the picture to give you a broader perspective of how things are in nature. So we look at this one life here on earth as the end of it. But then there is life before that also, there is life after that also, because life is continuous and eternal. So that uh, Vidya, which gives you a glimpse into the past and the future, and gives you a possibility of evolving, and while being here to be able to evolve in the future. That Vidya is called as spiritual Vidya or Brahma Vidya. So anybody who lives the life here without necessarily being aware of the Brahma Vidya, they have led a life which is kind of partly impactful. So every time we lose one of our closed ones is a warning bell for us that we need to start working on our own life so that we can make our life in the future better. That's only a temporary thing. That you make your life here better so that the other world is a reflection of this life, so that will also be better. But ideally, as we go forward, we should get disentangled from the issue of life and death itself. So we should grow beyond the need for life and death. In other words, we need to kind of gradually learn to establish ourselves in eternal life. Now, eternal life is not having the same body, having the same mind all the time. That is not eternal life. Eternal life is when you go beyond the need for the physical body and the subtle body and establish at the level of the causal body in tune with the reality. That is eternal life. Now, people have actually tried to make a concept of eternal life where they would uh, forever stay in this particular body or forever stay in a particular level of subtle body. That is not eternal life. Okay, eternal life is a life beyond the need for the bodies. In our original existence, in tune with the reality. That is eternal life. Okay, so we completed only few pages when you were not around. So we started the cleaning chapter. So we are in page number 114. So where are we? Gopal Krishna, I hope you are awake.
Uh, I think it's so our emotions create samskaras ಅಂತ.
So being awake is one thing. Being in tune with what is happening is another thing. Bharat, remember that. Being awake is one thing. Being in tune with what is happening is another thing. Sometimes we are awake, but we are totally out of tune. So, Gopal Krishna, how confident are you that we are in that part?
I have underlined it until there. So
So, it is by deduction, induction, deduction that Gopal Krishna has said, okay, this is where we were. Okay. So, does every thought end up taking root in the subconscious and becoming an impression? I asked. It's the thought's emotional content that gets planted, not the thought itself. So the thought's emotional content is like the root. That is what gets planted into the consciousness. A samskara is your emotional memory. It is the emotion associated with that particular thought. We may not retain that memory at a conscious level, but we may not retain the existential memory, but its emotional content certainly remains with us. Most of the time, that emotional content remains dormant, it's hidden away in the subconscious. However, when we encounter a situation that resonates with that particular emotion, that emotional state gets triggered. This produces similar thoughts to the parent thought, the thought with which the emotion was originally associated. When thoughts and emotions become repetitive, our actions become habitual. So, underline that. When the thoughts and emotions become repetitive, our actions become habitual. That's what you call as habits, where the thoughts and the emotion repeat in the same sequence. So, our emotions create the samskaras that are planted in the subconscious, I said. Yes, said Daji. But every thought has some emotional content. How much emotion it contains is only a matter of degree. Even if the emotion associated with thought is not particularly intense, that thought will have at least some positive or negative flavor to it. No thought is completely neutral. Please underline no. No thought is completely neutral. In other words, devoid of emotions. Some amount of emotions will be there in every thought. To be neutral is to have no thoughts at all. That is the state of pure perception or pure witnessing. Underline. What is the state of pure perception or pure witnessing? A state where there are no thoughts at all. If there are no thoughts, there are no emotions also. So that is the state of pure witness. The greater a thought's emotional intensity, the stronger its subconscious influence. That samskara or impression will be stronger. So the samskaras are stronger to the extent of the strength of the emotions it contains. The more the emotions, stronger the samskaras. We often associate thought with the mind and emotions with the heart. However, I prefer to view it as a heart mind complex or field because there can be no emotion without thinking and no thinking without emotion. With, with spiritual practice, you said something, Ganesh? You heard something, no?
It
And when I
yeah,
heard something, Ganesh's thing was highlighted as green.
there's something that echoes back from Ganeshan brother's computer. Like your voice itself comes from his computer.
Okay. Oh, my voice itself is coming back as spirit. I didn't realize that. Okay. Now, Gopal Krishna has found a solution to this mysterious phenomenon. I prefer to view it as a heart mind field because there is no emotion without thinking and no thinking without emotion. With spiritual practice, however, a time comes when the heart becomes completely unbiased, when it has no likes or dislikes, no preference or prejudices. That is when the mind transcends thinking and becomes a mere witness perceiving reality directly. Until then, our thoughts affect our heart and the heart's activity affects our mind. So, this is one important concept to keep in mind. Heart and the mind work in tandem with one another. The heart affects the mind, mind in turn affects the heart. That's the reason why in cinemas you see that whenever there is a shock to the mind, they hold the chest and they fall down, acting as if they are dead. So many cinemas you've seen like that, no? So that is because whenever shock is given to the mind, the heart reacts to it. And in fact, although they are show in the cinema like that, it is also true. When people are depressed, they are likely to have heart attack 50% time, 50% risk is more. So if a person suffers from depression, their chance of heart attack, suffering heart attack increases by 50%. So just remember, okay? So that's why many of the patients with anxious disorder, they come to the doctor as if something is going to happen to their heart and they are going to die. So the feeling, the emotions are at the mind level, but they perceive certain things happening at the heart level. That they're going to have a heart attack, so they might die. So that's why they come to the doctor. But in depression, again, the mood or the depression is at the level of the mind, but the heart also pays a price. Very similarly, when we have a lot of enmity about somebody, a feeling of enmity about somebody, the heart also pays a price for that. So, Arishad Varga, Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya, these six things. Whenever we have these things, these kind of crude negative emotions, it has a very big impact on the heart. So, Arishad Vargas is called as Shad Vargas. So, Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya. Now, out of these, Kama, Krodha are God given. The other four we create. Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya we create. Okay. What determines a thought's emotional content? I asked. Then the underlying the ego. Take Daji. So emotional content is directly related to the ego. The ego is our sense of self. It is the feeling of I-ness. To truly understand its role in creating impressions, you will have to permit me to digress for a moment and go into greater depth on this topic of ego. Yes, please, I said. Okay, said Daji. The ego's only motive is self-preservation underlying. The function of the ego is self-preservation and self-protection. Self-protection is included in self-preservation. It fears being extinguished, you see, therefore it constantly works to bolster itself, to increase itself. So it's afraid that it's going to get decimated or extinguished. That is the fear of the ego. The ego is a funny thing. When someone asks where we feel things, we point to the heart. If someone asks where we think things, we point to the head. Then where is the ego? It doesn't really exist anywhere. Yet it tends to dominate our lives. Please underline this. It does not exist anywhere, but it tends to dominate our life. Since the ego does not exist in any tangible way, it secures its position through what it considered to be its possessions. So, ego does not exist anywhere, but it asserts its presence through the possessions that we take. For instance, you buy a big house and your ego declares, I am this. It has measured and quantified itself through the particular possession. This is how it proves its existence to itself. So we assert the ego through our possessions. So in other words, for us to assert the ego, we need to have possessions. Suppose if you don't have any possessions, their chance of asserting their ego is very minimal. That was one of the reasons why the kings of the past used to give away everything, throw away their kingdom and pass it on to somebody else, and then they used to retire to the god, to the forest. In other words, what are they trying to do? They are actually trying to renounce the possessions. In a way, when you renounce the possessions, they would feel that they are actually going to modify the ego. But the two possessions that they carry everywhere is their own body and mind and the contents of body and mind. That they cannot renounce even if they go to the forest. They are their possessions only, no? The body and the mind and the contents thereof are the possessions that they carry everywhere. So until unless you renounce the identification with the body and the mind and the contents thereof, you cannot be said to have renounced everything. So that's the reason why until unless we cross the mind region, our ego is still there. Even in the mind region, you have 11 rings of ego, the circles of ego. So now, emotional content is related to the ego. Ego asserts its presence by through the possessions. So there are different ways that people have tried in the past to work on the ego. If it asserts through possession, give up the possessions. Then the ego cannot assert. So the ego should mellow down, right? But the point is, giving away the external possessions is not enough. The real possessions that we need to give up is the possession of the sense organs, the body, and the mind, and the contents thereof. Until unless we learn to give up possession of these things, ego will not be mellowed down. Now you tell me, when you meditate, how does the ego get mellowed down? Now that is clearly said. You cannot work on the ego directly because it doesn't exist. How are you going to work on something that doesn't exist? And it asserts itself only through possessions. How will you work on it? What is it that happens in meditation that makes the ego refined? ಭರತ್ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾನೆ ಎಲ್ಲೋ ತಂದು ಸಿಕ್ಕಾಕ್ಸಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ ನನ್ನ ಅಂತ. Gopal Krishna will answer now. Wait, I'm looking for the ego. Once I'm getting it, I'll tell you. I'm trying to find it. Where it is.
You get detached from that samskara of possession over the period of time with meditation.
In other words, it's a good answer. All the external things that we actually possess, we have a copy of that samskara in our system. And we are attached to that particular copy. Okay? When we are attached to that particular copy, our ego is asserting its presence. What happens in meditation?
That gets cleaned off.
Partly it gets cleaned up. But how does the abhyasi cooperate? What is the role of the abhyasi? What do you people do in meditation?
We divert the attention, energy from that to the infinite object.
Correct. So what happens then?
It's cut, thus, energy is cut.
The flow of energy to what is cut?
The samskara, the possession samskara,
So the
whatever.
flow of energy towards the sense organs, the body, the mind, and the samskaras, all the four, it is cut or reduced. To the extent that the flow of the energy towards these four things are reduced, to that extent, the ego becomes mellowed down. To the extent that the energy flow to these four things are cut, to that extent, the ego becomes mellowed down. In other words, it does not assert its identity through these four possessions. The possessions are the sense organs, the body, the mind, and the samskaras, which it contains. So these are the four things through which our ego asserts. When we no longer identify with these four things, then the ego is relatively mellowed down. Okay? Then we gradually move from one level of idea, from the idea of me and mine, to gradually we and ours. That is still ego only. The me and mind is embedded in the we and ours. So you continue to still have the ego at a subtler level. Okay? Then you continue to go further. Then you have the idea of you and him, which is about God. There again, when you have the idea of the you, the idea of I is also there embedded. If not directly, but indirectly. So even that idea of you and yours also needs to be given up. When all these three are given up, me and I, me and mine, we and ours, you and yours. When all these things are given up, that is when you say you have crossed the realm of the ego. The ego is no longer there functioning. You are now in the state of pure witness, the witness consciousness. Does it make sense how the ego evolves? So, ego is just like a chameleon. It keeps changing, it keeps camouflaging. It wants to assert its presence. But if you don't like one way of its assertion, it changes to other way. So you need to be very, very careful in working out how all this ego is manifesting. So if you say, I don't want the use of the word I, me, and mine, it says, okay, use the word we and ours. I'm okay there. Then if you say, I don't want we and ours, it will say, okay, you use the word you and yours. I'm okay there. But essentially, it does not want to get extinguished. It wants to assert its presence. That's all it does. So that is the job of the ego. So the funniest thing is a thing which does not exist asserts throughout our life and predominates our life. So we cannot work directly on the ego. It is the cooperation of the Abhyasi during the sitting that works on refining the ego. The other thing is the ego will become mellowed down to the extent that the samskaras are cleaned off. Now, if the samskaras are cleaned off, ego has less possessions to assert its existence. If there are a lot of samskaras, then there are a lot of possibilities of the ego asserting through any of those possessions. The samskaras are our possessions anyway. So when the samskaras are cleaned up, to that extent, the ego cannot assert through bigger number of samskaras. Now it has to assert through smaller number of samskaras. To that extent, you can say the ego is mellowed down. In other words, when we say that you are gone beyond the realm of you and yours, all the samskaras are gone by that time. When all the samskaras are gone, the ego has nothing to identify itself with. There is no possession. By that time, you are detached from the body, detached from the mind, and detached from the samskaras, and there are no samskaras. That is when you establish yourself in the realm of the witness, pure witness. Is that okay? Any questions?
Yeah,
So
again,
that
the identity, does it still remains there?
Identity remains. Identity, you can say it's a refined part of the ego. The ego loses its existence. It gets converted into something final, and that is the identity. So when the identity is there, when we exist at the level of the identity, we don't have ego. When we exist at the level of the ego, we don't have access to identity, our original identity. So one of the two can exist. You cannot have both existing at the same time. Okay? Either ego exists or identity exists. If you exist as ego, you have not got access to identity. If you exist as identity, you have no ego. Okay? So that's why Babaji says that the moment you enter into the central region, ego is gone, only identity remains. What is the identity? Our original existence is the identity. Okay? So that's the relationship between identity and ego. So you can say that the ego gets metamorphosized into identity. In other words, it becomes final. It loses its grosser nature. It becomes final, and now it takes on the role of the identity. Bharat, you want to ask something?
no, brother, I had one question from many days. Okay, does ego also consider as a samskara, or is it like
Does ego itself is a samskara?
mm,
Now, what is the answer? You only tell.
no, like just now I got that clear, but you said now that at last when ego is gone, every samskara, so that after ego that there will be nothing which will be established, right?
Once the samskaras are gone and ego is also gone, then you will be established in your original state of existence.
But does this happen like from here to end? Like if a person of like is revealing and he comes to know that this ego is haunting me, and first only the does that ego get removed, or how is
I didn't get the question. Repeat it.
like you said now, like ego is the last thing. After that we assign ourselves in the higher dimension. So once if any person, for say some X person, uh, is able to remove this ego at first only, does he that time only get established in that realm?
What do you mean by first only? We didn't get
Like
that.
not first only means before removing samskaras or any spirituality.
Remember one thing, anybody comes into this life because they have got a set of samskaras that they have to clear off. That is the reason for birth. So anybody who is born will have some set of samskaras already. Additionally, while we go through this life, we create more samskaras. Right? So you cannot have a situation where somebody is born and they have no samskaras. Even avatars, when they have to come to life, they have to bring some samskaras because they have to go through this life, no? So avatars also bring some samskaras. Now you might question, where are they getting the samskaras from? That we will discuss when we read about the chapter on avatar in complete works. But the point is, avatars also need to get some samskaras. Avatars also need to have the three bodies, like we all have. There is no difference whatsoever. In other words, anybody who is born, whether a normal human being or a divine avatar, they will have three bodies, they will have some samskaras. The very fact that they are born indicates that there is some samskara. Without samskara, nobody is born. Without samskara, there is no need to be born. Why will you be born? Suppose you are an instrument of nature and you are born for doing the work of nature. Even then, you have to bring these three bodies and the samskaras with you. So, the question then comes, how do we get the samskaras if we are already liberated and we are actually coming down for the work of nature? How do we get the samskaras then? A liberated soul chooses to come down to do the work of nature and then go to a higher realm. That's possible. If that is the case, then nature has to send them appropriately with all the things necessary for their work. So if the nature is sending them for its work, it has to pack them with all the things necessary. And that includes the three bodies and some amount of samskaras. Then it's the nature's responsibility to give some samskaras to this particular liberated soul which is coming down for its work. Got the point? So if you're going on a trip, don't you think you pack your bag with all the eatables? Especially in a place where you don't know what you are going to get. You are unsure. So you will pack with cakes, biscuits, halwa. Don't you think you pack? And then you probably will pack with a dry. What is that? What is it called?
And
Huh?
chocolates.
Chocolate ಅಲ್ಲ ಕಣೋ.
Dry
ಏನದು?
fruits.
Not dry fruits. This ಏನದು ನೀವು ತಿಂತಿರಲ್ಲಪ್ಪ, ಏನು ರೊಟ್ಟಿ ತಿಂತೀರ ದಿನ ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ ಎದ್ದು? ಬಕ್ರಿ. ಏನದು? ಜೋಳದ ರೊಟ್ಟಿ. ಡ್ರೈ ಜೋಳದ ರೊಟ್ಟಿ ಪ್ಯಾಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತೀರ ನೀವು ಅಲ್ವಾ? ಸೊ ಆ ಥರ you pack everything before you start and you pack everything that you think you will require on the go. Likewise, when a liberated soul is sent for the work of nature, nature packs the thing that is necessary for the liberated soul to do its work. It's the job of the nature. ಸರಿ. ಸೊ ಈಗ ನಿನಗೆ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಸಣ್ಣ ಹುಡುಗ ಇರಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ when you are small, if your parents are sending you on a school trip, don't you think they'll pack everything for you? For the breakfast, for the lunch, for the evening snack, everything they'll pack now in your bag before they send you on a school trip. Do they send otherwise? If you are not packing, if your parents are not packing, the school teachers have to pack, right? Somebody has to pack for you. Likewise, Nature will pack it for you, not to worry. Sarina, does it answer your question? So, your idea that somebody can be born without samskara is not correct. Anybody who's born has some amount of samskaras, either their own or backed by nature. And secondly, they also carry all the three bodies. Okay, so there's this discussion on whether avatars have three bodies and other things. When we read complete works, we'll discuss about that. Okay. Ganesh, you want to ask something? You're looking at the time.
No, no. In fact, that same example is there in the movie Matrix, uh, where the person goes into a server and installs whatever required, and they get ready for the action, and then uninstall it also.
Correct. So we have to borrow from somewhere. So how to get samskar as a beg, borrow, or steal? Universal mantra. Okay. Beg, borrow, or steal. You can beg from somebody, or you can borrow from somebody, or you can steal from somebody.
Is my
Hmm.
understanding correct? Like, no, generally, like, uh, whatever the consciousness we are, whatever we read and understand, may not be up to the perfect state, but a certain amount of layer is created where people get caught in that area, and that's where the divine intervention comes and clear that or clean that consciousness and goes away. So I think that Avatar itself will come for that purpose, to clean up that and take people to another level of consciousness.
Avatar comes to make people aware that there is a higher level of existence, higher level of consciousness, that it's possible to go to that higher state. They'll also give some means to go towards that higher state. That's the purpose. Clean up the unnecessary samskaras that are clogging the nature.
Okay.
Talk, indicate about the possibility of existing at a higher level of consciousness, higher level of existence, and give a path to go towards that higher state of existence. So they're doing three things at the same time. Okay. So shall we continue now? However, so the possessions is not just external possessions, but also the possession of the body, the mind, the sense organs, and the samskaras. All are our possessions. However, possessions does not only mean material belongings, rather it refers to anything that the ego has claimed as its own. The ego says my nationality, my language, my culture, my body, my intellect, my ideology. It doesn't matter whether something actually belongs to you or not. Does anything really belong to you? Even the soul is not ours. The ego appropriates. It identifies itself with something and feels the sense of ownership over it. So feels identifies itself with something and feels the sense of ownership that this is mine. Now, this feeling of mindness has a side effect. When we feel that something is ours, we develop expectations. My business should be successful. My spouse should be attractive. My car should be luxury. You don't care about the other person's business, spouse, or car. But when your ego is invested, you care very much. When our expectations are met or exceeded, we are happy and we react positively. When they are unmet, we react negatively. So, without the ego's involvement, there is no emotional reactions and then hence no impressions. That's right, said Daji. The ego feels entitled to certain outcomes based upon the sense of perceived ownership. Then it reacts accordingly and we form impressions. Remember that a reaction can be either positive or negative. It is either towards something or against something. Every reaction contains either like or dislike, attraction or repulsion, desire or fear. There is no such thing as neutral reaction because to be neutral is to not to react. So you are saying that emotion comes from the ego. Yes, emotions come from the ego, but not feeling. Please underline this. Said Jaji. Emotion has a bias. Now you can have they can ask you a question regarding difference between emotion and feeling. So the answer is here. Emotion comes from the ego, not feelings. That's one difference. Emotions has bias. It likes some things and dislikes others. Feelings, on the other hand, has no preferences or prejudices. It is generous and accepting because it comes from the heart. So emotions comes from the mind, feeling comes from the heart. So feelings are much more generous and accepting. Emotions are narrow and they are having bias. Subdue the ego and true feelings naturally emerges. So when the ego is subdued or refined, emotional content decreases. That allows the space for the feelings to manifest from the heart. So to the extent that the feelings are manifesting, to that extent the ego is refined, to that extent the emotions have come down. Does it make sense how they are related? These emotional reactions do not leave us unscathed. We always receive the brunt of our reactions. They affect our consciousness and manifest as emotional or psychological states. And this happens because of points A, B, C, D, I said. We'll just finish this page. In the chest area, there are 4 points called A, B, C, D. These 4 points determine the exact effect that a reaction will have on us. Babuji discovered the points A and B in 1945. Points C and D came to light more recently. Daji says that even now, many facets of subtle spiritual anatomy are still being revealed to us. So Daji publicly revealed the locations of point C and D in 2015. He had already mentioned their existence to me in private, but not their locations. One day I wrote to him to find out where they were, and he replied, "Please locate them yourself and send your findings to me." After spending a day internally researching their positions, I drew a diagram of where I thought them to be, which I sent to Daji. He wrote back saying that move them a bit towards the right and it will be correct. But do not share this, or it will rob others of the joy of discovering something new. However, now that the positions of these points are public knowledge, they can be shared. To locate the points ABCD, start at the base of the sternum where the rib cage cavity begins. Measure one finger width downwards from the sternum using your own fingers. Then go 4 fingers width to the left. This is the location of point B. 2 fingers above is point A, 2 fingers above is point C on the bottom rib. Point D is 2 fingers to the left of point C, directly underneath the left nipple. So we will continue from here tomorrow. Okay. So any questions from there? I think there are two methods of locating the ABCD points. Both are fine. If you write either one of them in the exam, it's fine.